The blue-green waters of Zalani Prime had turned the color of death. What once sparkled like jewels beneath twin suns now looked like thick soup, filled with floating debris and the bodies of sea creatures that could no longer survive in their own home. Commander Park Ji-ho sat in the communications center of Earth Station Alpha, watching the desperate messages flood in from across the galaxy. Each transmission from the dying ocean world made his stomach tighten with anger and disgust. The people, gentle beings who had never hurt anyone, were begging for help that would never come. "Sir, we have another message from the Zalani Council," said Lieutenant Kim Soren, her young face pale, as she listened to her headset. "They say the toxin levels have increased again. Their doctors think they have maybe 4 months left, not 6. Ji-ho rubbed his tired eyes. He had been reading reports about Zalani Prime for 3 weeks now, ever since Earth's deep space monitors had picked up the first distress calls. The story was always the same. For 50 years, the Hegemony Coalition had used the beautiful ocean world as their personal garbage dump. They had built factories on the few land masses, pumping waste directly into the seas where the Zalani lived. When the profits dried up, they had simply packed their equipment and left, leaving behind a dying world. "What about the Galactic Council?" asked Sergeant Lee Minho, looking up from his datapad. "They have to do something, right? This is genocide." Soren shook her head sadly. "The council met yesterday. They voted to classify the Zalani as a non-essential species. They said the cost of evacuation would be too high for the economic benefit." The room fell silent, except for the steady beeping of communication equipment. Everyone knew what those words meant. In the cold language of galactic politics, the Zalani were being written off as acceptable losses. 43 million intelligent beings would be left to die because helping them would cost too much money. Ji-ho stood up slowly and walked to the large window that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, Zalani families were watching their children grow sick from poisoned water. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was counting down its final days while the galaxy's most powerful governments turned their backs. "Sir," Soren's voice was quiet. "The Hegemony Coalition just released a statement. They're saying the Zalani brought this on themselves by not investing in proper environmental protection." A red flash of anger shot through Ji-ho's chest. He had read the intelligence reports. The Zalani had begged the Hegemony to stop the pollution for decades. They had offered to work for free, to give up valuable resources, to do anything to save their world. The Hegemony had ignored every request. "What about the other major powers?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The Vorthan Empire says they cannot spare the ships. The Crystal Federation claims they lack the proper life support technology for aquatic species. The Trade Guild says it would set a dangerous precedent." Soren paused, her voice getting smaller. "Everyone has an excuse, sir." Ji-ho thought about his own daughter, Yuna, who was about the same age as many of the young Zalani he had seen in the video messages. She loved swimming in the lakes near their home on Earth. What would he do if someone poisoned those lakes? What would any parent do? "Lieutenant Choi Hanna just sent word from Earth Command," said Minho, reading from his screen. "They want to know if we think humanity should get involved." The question hung in the air like smoke. Humanity was still the new species in galactic politics. They had only made contact with alien civilizations 15 years ago. They had small fleets, limited resources, and barely any influence with the major powers. Getting involved in something this big could hurt Earth's chances of joining the more exclusive trade networks and defense pacts. But Ji-ho kept thinking about those desperate messages from Zalani Prime. Parents holding their sick children, teachers trying to keep schools running as the water around them turned poisonous, artists creating their final works before their civilization ended forever. "Sir, we have President Lee on secure communication," announced Soren. "He wants to speak with you directly." Ji-ho straightened his uniform and walked to the private communication booth. President Lee's face appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. Behind him, Jiho could see the flags of every nation on Earth hanging in the presidential office. "Commander Park," the president said simply, "tell me the truth. Can we save them?" Jiho took a deep breath. "Mr. President, it would take every transport ship we have. We would need to retrofit them all for aquatic life support. The cost would be enormous, and it would leave Earth's own colonies vulnerable. Most of our allies think we would be crazy to try." President Lee nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked you, Commander. Can we save them?" For a moment, Jiho saw his daughter's face in his mind. Then he thought about 43 million Zalani families who would never see their children grow up if no one helped them. "Yes, sir," he said firmly. "We can save them." The president smiled for the first time in the conversation. "Then start making the preparations. When everyone else abandons them, humanity steps in." The great assembly hall of Earth's united government had never been so quiet. President Lee Min-ho stood at the podium, looking out at representatives from every nation, colony, and space station that humanity had built among the stars. The weight of what he was about to ask them pressed down on his shoulders like a mountain. "The Zalani have 4 months to live," he said simply. "Maybe less. Every other civilization in the galaxy has turned their back on them. Today, we decide what kind of species we want to be." Representative Choi Hannah, from the Mars colonies, was the first to speak. She stood slowly, her red hair catching the light from the dome above. "Mr. President, with respect, we barely have enough ships to protect our own people. The outer colonies are still building their defenses. If we send our fleet to save the Zalani, what happens if someone attacks Earth while our ships are gone?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall. It was a fair question, and everyone knew it. Humanity controlled only 12 star systems, tiny compared to the vast empires that dominated the galaxy. They were still building their first real warships, still learning how to survive in a universe full of species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Admiral Song Daeho stood up from his seat in the military section. His uniform was decorated with ribbons from humanity's first space battles. "Fought to protect colonies from pirates and raiders." "Representative Choi makes a good point," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But let me ask you all something. When my grandfather fought in the old wars on Earth, do you think he worried about the cost when he saw innocent people in danger?" The old admiral's eyes swept across the assembly. "I've read the intelligence reports from Zalani Prime. These people never hurt anyone. They're scientists, artists, teachers. They spent their whole history trying to live in peace with their ocean world. Now they're dying because someone else poisoned their home and walked away." A young representative from the Europa station stood up. Kim Jinwoo was barely 30 years old, one of the youngest people ever elected to the assembly. "Admiral Song, no one here wants to see the Zalani die. But we have to think about our own people too. The retrofit costs alone would use up our emergency reserves. And what if we can't save them all? What if we sacrifice everything and still fail?" President Lee had been expecting this argument. He activated his personal display, showing holographic images that filled the air above the assembly. Video messages from Zalani Prime played in the space above their heads. Children swimming in poisoned water. Parents holding babies who couldn't stop coughing. Old Zalani teachers trying to keep schools running, even as their students grew sicker. Each day. "This is what failure looks like," the president said quietly. "This is what happens when people with power decide that helping others costs too much." The room fell silent again as the videos played. Representative Park Soyoung from the asteroid mining stations wiped tears from her eyes. Commander Yoon Nari, who ran the largest cargo fleet in human space, sat forward in her chair with her hands clenched into fists. "The question before us is simple," President Lee continued. "Do we have the right to call ourselves civilized if we can save 43 million innocent lives, but choose not to because it's expensive?" An older representative from Earth's African Union stood slowly. His name was Dr. Bae Dong-yuk, and he had been fighting poverty and disease on Earth for 40 years, before humanity ever reached the stars. Mr. President, I have spent my whole life trying to save people that others gave up on. I have seen what happens when the strong abandon the weak. It doesn't just hurt the people who die, it changes the people who walk away. It makes them smaller, meaner, more afraid. He paused, looking around the room at faces both young and old, from every part of human civilization. If we let this die when we could save them, what does that make us? How are we any different from the hegemony coalition that poisoned their world and left? Representative Choi stood again, but this time her voice was different, softer. Dr. Bae is right. My own family came from refugees who barely survived the climate wars. If other people hadn't risked everything to save them, I wouldn't be here today. Admiral Sung nodded grimly. I'll be honest with all of you. This mission will be dangerous. We'll have to retrofit every major cargo ship we have. We'll be traveling into contested space where the hegemony might try to stop us. Some of our people might not come home. He stood straighter, his old shoulders squaring with determination. But I'd rather risk everything trying to save innocent lives than live safely knowing we let them die. The vote, when it came, was not even close. Every single representative, from every human world and station and colony, voted the same way. Yes, Earth would mount the largest rescue mission in galactic history. As the assembly erupted in cheers and tears, President Lee felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. They had just committed humanity to an impossible task that could bankrupt their civilization or make them enemies of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. But as he watched the joy on the faces around him, he knew they had made the right choice. When everyone else abandoned the innocent, humanity would step in. That was who they were. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zalani system, and Captain Yoon Nari felt her heart sink at what she saw through the main viewport. Zalani Prime hung in space like a dying jewel, its once brilliant blue oceans now a sickly brown-green color that hurt to look at. Captain, we're getting readings from the planet's surface, reported Navigation Officer Han Woojin, his voice tight with worry. The toxin levels are much worse than our projections. The atmospheric processors are failing faster than the Zalani estimated. Nari gripped the arms of her captain's chair. Behind her, the bridge crew of the cargo vessel, New Hope, worked frantically at their stations. Through the ship's internal cameras, she could see the massive water-filled habitat modules they had built in the cargo bays. Each one could hold 200 Zalani families, but looking at the dying planet ahead of them, she wondered if they had enough space for everyone who needed saving. Communications, get me a link to the Zalani Council, she ordered, and send word to the rest of our fleet. We start rescue operations immediately. The face that appeared on her screen was that of Elder Korthala, one of the Zalani leaders she had been talking to during their journey from Earth. The elderly, Zalani's bioluminescent patterns were dim with exhaustion and sorrow, his large eyes filled with desperate hope. Captain Yoon, he said through the translation device. You came. Even after the latest reports, you actually came. Of course we came, Nari replied firmly. How much time do we really have? The elder's patterns flickered sadly. Our scientists believe 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we're lucky. The northern oceans are completely dead now. The southern seas are failing rapidly. We have moved as many of our people as possible to the deep ocean shelters, but even those are becoming poisonous. 3 weeks, Nari felt ice form in her stomach. Their original plan had been based on having 2 months to complete the evacuation. 3 weeks meant they would have to work faster than anyone thought possible. Take risks that could kill both rescuers and refugees. We'll make it work, she said with more confidence than she felt. Begin moving your people to the designated pickup zones. We're coming down. The first rescue shuttles launched within an hour. Pilot O Taejan guided his shuttle through the poisoned atmosphere of Zalani Prime. His co-pilot Seo Minji, monitoring the life support systems they had hastily installed for aquatic passengers. The shuttle bay had been flooded with specially treated water, creating a mobile ocean where Zilani refugees could survive the journey to the larger ships. "Look at that," Minji whispered as they descended toward the first pickup point. Below them, the once great Zilani city of Philandra was barely visible through the murky water. Beautiful coral towers that had taken centuries to grow were now gray and crumbling, covered in toxic algae that killed everything it touched. At the pickup zone, hundreds of Zilani families waited in underwater shelters. Parents held their children close, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing with fear and hope. Many of the younger Zilani were already showing signs of poisoning, their patterns flickering weakly, their movements slow and painful. "This is worse than the videos," Tajin muttered as he landed the shuttle on the floating platform the Zilani had built. "These people are dying right in front of us." Dr. Park Ji-hoon, the medical officer assigned to this shuttle, was already suiting up in his environmental gear. "Then we'd better work fast," he said grimly. "I'm going to start treating the sickest ones during transport. Minji, make sure our medical bay is ready for emergency care." The loading process took hours. Each Zilani family had to be carefully transferred from the poisoned ocean into the shuttle's clean water habitat. The human crew worked alongside Zilani volunteers, learning on the spot how to handle people whose bodies were completely different from their own. Young Ensign Kim Hyejin found herself helping a Zilani mother whose child was barely conscious from toxin exposure. The mother's translation device was broken, but the fear in her large eyes was universal. Hyejin held the small Zilani child gently while Dr. Park worked to flush the poisons from its system. "Is he going to be okay?" Hyejin asked quietly. Park didn't look up from his work. "I don't know. I'm learning Zilani medicine as I go, but we're not giving up on anyone." Back on the New Hope, Captain Yoon watched her screens as shuttle after shuttle returned with refugees. The ship's corridors were filled with human crew members who had given up their quarters to make room for Zilani families. Everyone slept in storage bays or took turns using the few remaining beds. Engineer Jang Yoon-ji worked 18-hour shifts keeping the life support systems running. The ship was carrying 3 times as many living beings as it was designed for, pushing every system beyond safe limits. "Captain, we're getting strain readings on the hull," she reported during one of her brief breaks. "The extra water weight is pushing us past structural limits." "How much longer can we hold together?" Yoon asked. Yoon-ji wiped sweat from her forehead. "If we're careful, maybe until we reach the temporary colonies. If we're not careful, ... double quotes, she shrugged. "We all go down together." Yoon looked at the status boards showing 12 ships like hers, all overloaded, all straining to carry far more refugees than they were built for. Around her, human and Zilani crew members worked side by side, sharing the same air, the same risk, the same desperate hope. "Then we'd better be careful," she said quietly. "We've come too far to fail now." The ice moon of Titan II had never seen life before humans and Zilani arrived together. Captain Kim Hyun-woo stood on the observation platform of the orbital station, watching massive heating units melt the frozen oceans below, while Zilani guided the process with their advanced understanding of water. Chemistry. 3 months had passed since the rescue fleet had limped into the Sol system with their precious cargo of 43 million refugees. The journey had been harder than anyone expected. 2 ships had suffered critical failures and had to be towed the final weeks. The New Hope had lost half its hull plating, and Captain Yoon Nari was still recovering from radiation exposure she got while manually repairing the reactor. But they had made it. Every single Zilani who wanted to leave their dying world was now safe in human space. Captain Kim called Engineer Bae Sunmi as she approached with her tablet full of daily reports. "The first residential zones are ready for families. The engineers say the water temperature and mineral content are perfect." Yoon-woo smiled as he looked down at the moon's surface. What had been solid ice 6 months ago was now a network of warm oceans, dotted with floating platforms where humans and Zilani worked together. The sight still amazed him every day. The partnership had happened naturally, almost by accident. Human engineering could build the massive infrastructure needed to transform dead worlds into living ones. But Zilani biotechnology could grow entire cities from coral and algae, creating beautiful homes that would have taken humans decades to construct with metal and concrete. "Sir, Elder Corthella is here for the daily planning meeting," announced Communications Officer Lee Minho. The elderly Zilani leader entered the observation room with his usual grace, his bioluminescent patterns bright and healthy for the first time since the humans had met him. The transformation in all the Zilani had been remarkable to watch. As their bodies healed from the poisoning of their homeworld, their natural light patterns had become brilliant and beautiful, turning their underwater cities into works of living art. Captain Kim Corthella said through his translation device, "I have wonderful news. The first joint nursery facility is ready. Human and Zilani children can now learn together." Hyunwoo felt his heart warm at the thought. His own daughter, little Kim Subin, had been fascinated by the Zilani children from the moment she met them. Despite the language barrier, kids had found ways to play together that didn't need words. He had watched human children splash in shallow pools while young Zilani swam circles around them, both groups laughing in the universal language of childhood fun. "Elder, I have to ask," Hyunwoo said carefully, "are your people truly happy here? This isn't your home world. These aren't your natural oceans. Do you ever regret leaving Zilani Prime?" The old being's patterns shifted to what humans had learned meant deep thoughtfulness. "Captain, may I show you something?" Corthella activated his personal display, showing images from the new settlements. Human farmers working alongside Zilani aquaculture specialists to grow food that both species could eat. Human doctors and Zilani healers sharing knowledge to create better medical treatments. Human children and Zilani youth studying together in classrooms that were half land and half water. "On our homeworld," Corthella said softly, "we lived alone for 10,000 years. We knew only our own ways, our own thoughts, our own dreams. Here, working with your people, we are becoming something new, something better." The elder paused, his patterns brightening with what humans had learned was joy. "My great-granddaughter told me yesterday that she wants to be a starship engineer, like her human friend Park Yuna. 6 months ago, we had never even seen the stars. Now our children dream of traveling between them." Through the observation window, they could see the latest construction project taking shape. Human heavy machinery worked alongside Zilani biosculptors to create something that neither species could have built alone, a massive spaceport that would serve as the hub for their growing alliance. "Captain," Bei Sunmi said, reading from her communications panel, "we're getting requests from 3 more human colonies asking for Zilani partners. The terraforming projects they've completed together are being studied by engineers across known space." Hunwoo nodded with satisfaction. The Human-Zilani alliance had grown from a desperate rescue mission into something that was changing the balance of power in local space. Their combined technologies were creating worlds faster and better than anything the major galactic powers could achieve. "Sir," Lee Minho called out urgently, "we're receiving a priority communication from Earth Defense Command. There's a situation developing in the Kethmer system." The main screen lit up with the image of Admiral Song Daeho, now commander of the Alliance fleet. Behind him, they could see the flags of both Earth and New Zilani hanging side by side. "Captain Kim," the Admiral said grimly, "we have another species in trouble. The Kethmer homeworld is experiencing massive seismic failures. Their whole civilization could be destroyed within months." Elder Corthella stepped forward, his patterns shifting to determined resolve. "Admiral Song," he said clearly, "the Zilani people remember what it feels like to be abandoned by the galaxy. We will not let that happen to others." Hunwoo looked around the observation room at his mixed crew of humans and Zilani, all of them already preparing for whatever came next. They had learned something important during the rescue from Zilani Prime. When different species worked together with trust and respect, they could achieve the impossible. "Admiral," he said firmly, "New Zilani volunteers to provide bioengineering support for the Kethma rescue. When everyone else abandons them, we step in." The Alliance was no longer just about survival. It had become about hope. Admiral Song Daeho stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship Unity, watching the stars through the massive viewport that stretched across the command center. At 75 years old, he had lived long enough to see humanity transform from a small, unknown species into something the galaxy could no longer ignore. The bridge around him buzzed with activity from both human and Zilani crew members. Lieutenant Commander Park Juan worked at the tactical station, while her Zilani partner Velthera monitored bioship systems that could repair themselves using living coral technology. It had taken 5 years, but the two species had learned to work together so smoothly that visiting diplomats often forgot they were seeing representatives of two different worlds. "Admiral," called Communications Officer Zheng Yunji, her voice cutting through the bridge chatter. "We're receiving another distress signal. This one's from the Sectar Confederacy." Song turned from the viewport with interest. The Sectar were one of the older galactic powers, proud and independent. For them to send a distress call to the Alliance meant their situation was desperate indeed. "What's their problem, Lieutenant?" he asked. Yanji's fingers danced over her console as she translated the alien communication protocols. "Sir, it appears their core industrial worlds are suffering from massive environmental collapse. Their manufacturing processes have poisoned 3 entire star systems. They are facing the extinction of billions of their people." The bridge fell quiet. Everyone present remembered the stories of Zilani Prime, of 43 million people abandoned by a galaxy that considered their lives too expensive to save. But billions. That was a crisis beyond anything the Alliance had ever faced. "Sir," said Captain No Jae-wan, the ship's commanding officer, "the Sectar Confederacy has over 200 worlds. They've been a major galactic power for 3,000 years. How could they let this happen?" Admiral Song walked slowly to the central command platform, his weathered hands clasping behind his back. Around the bridge, he could see the faces of young officers who had grown up hearing stories of the great rescue missions. To them, the idea of abandoning entire civilizations was unthinkable. "Captain No," he said quietly, "the same way the Hegemony Coalition abandoned the Zilani, the same way the Galactic Council abandoned the Kethmer and the Vosak, and every other species we've saved over the past 5 years. When helping others costs more than ignoring them, most civilizations choose to look the other way." The main screen activated, showing the current status of Alliance space. 15 star systems now flew the joint flags of the Human-Zilani Alliance. Each world represented another species that had been written off by the major galactic powers, then rescued and integrated into their growing confederation. Admiral Velthara spoke up from her biosystems station, her translation device rendering her clicks and whistles into perfect Korean. "My people's records show that the Sectar Confederacy voted against helping us when Zilani Prime was dying. They called our rescue an unwise allocation of resources." Song nodded grimly. He remembered that vote. The Sectar had been among the loudest voices, arguing that the Zilani should be left to die, rather than waste ships and credits on a hopeless cause. Young Ensign Kim Do-yeon, fresh from the academy, raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, does that mean we're not going to help them because they didn't help us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an old fire. Song looked around the bridge at his crew, humans who had grown up believing that everyone deserved to be saved, and Zilani, who remembered what it felt like to be abandoned by the galaxy. "Ensign Kim," Song said slowly, "what do you think we should do?" The young officer straightened in his chair, his face serious with thought. "Sir, My grandfather always told me that being better than someone doesn't mean acting better than them only when they deserve it. It means acting better than them, especially when they don't deserve it. Captain No Jaewon smiled proudly at his junior officer. The boy's got a point, Admiral. If we only save the people who would save us, how are we any different from the powers that abandoned them in the first place? Song turned to look at the tactical display, showing Alliance fleet positions throughout their territory. Hundreds of ships, staffed by crews from a dozen different species, all of them races that had been considered expendable by the major galactic powers. All of them now working together to build something better. Communications, he ordered. Send a message to all Alliance worlds. Tell them we have a new rescue mission. The scale will be unlike anything we've attempted before. Yoonji's hands flew over her console. Sir, should I mention that the Sector voted against helping the Zalani? Include it in the briefing data? Song replied. But also make sure every world knows that we're not doing this for the Sector government. We're doing it for the billions of innocent people who are going to die if no one helps them. Within hours, the responses began flooding in from across Alliance space. Every member world volunteered ships, supplies, and personnel. The Kethmer, whose crystal-based technology could process toxic atmospheres, offered their expertise. The Vasak contributed their medical knowledge. Even the newest member species, barely settled on their refugee worlds, sent what help they could. Admiral, reported Captain No, as the volunteer lists grew longer. We're getting more ships volunteering than we have space to coordinate. The rescue fleet is going to be larger than our entire military. Song smiled as he watched the holographic display fill with ships from across known space. Not the ships of great galactic empires built on conquest and profit, but the vessels of peoples who had learned what it meant to be abandoned, and chose to make sure it never happened to others. Then we'd better get started, he said. When everyone else abandons them, we step in. That's not just our motto anymore. It's who the galaxy is becoming.